Good morning, Jason Bowman coming at you from the cold and wet Pacific Northwest, just the way I like it. Today we're going to be talking about appeals, your best friend at the IRS. We're talking about why appeals is your BFF, how they can help you and your clients. And I think this is going to become particularly even more important if President Trump gets any part of his budget through, in particular the IRS budget cut, an additional $250 million to be cut from the IRS. So some people will say that's a good thing, some people will say that's a bad thing, but no matter what, it is going to have a direct impact on our ability to resolve cases, which will make appeals all that more important. My name is Jason Bowman, and this is session 2 of our IRS Collections Representation Level 2 program. Last week, Dan presented about offers in compromise, and today we're talking about appeals. Next week, I'll be talking about tax lien withdrawals, discharges, and subordinations. So I didn't think Dan was going to be here with us. I think I'm getting dates confused about when he's at his daughter's soccer games and when he's not, because things are just kind of muddling together. So Dan is here. So welcome, Dan. Or not. Dan, can you hear me? Okay, he may not have his mic on. So we will just jump right in. So our course objectives today are to understand the role of appeals within the IRS. Appeals has a very specific job, and it is really geared towards one thing. So we'll talk about that. We will specifically talk about the CDP appeal and the CAP appeal process, as well as options for trust fund recovery penalty and OIC denial appeals. And we'll talk about what you can expect from appeals. You know, what outcomes exist, what the process looks like, and what you can expect with the interaction. Okay, so those are the big things we'll be talking about. So what exactly is appeals? Well, it is an independent division within the IRS. They go through pretty lengthy procedures, actually, to invoke a level of independence from other IRS offices. Dan, I'm getting quite a bit of feedback through your side. Just to let you know, the purpose of this independence is to prevent litigation. All right, don't forget that it costs the government money to take things through tax court or district court. There is a hard cost associated with that, on the taxpayer dime. And so in order to help minimize those costs, the IRS has programs in order to minimize what goes to tax court. Now, you're probably already familiar that a lot of things that go through tax court never actually make it in front of a tax court judge, because before you get to tax court, there is one final hearing that you have with IRS counsel where they try to hash everything out. And I can't remember the exact number, but something like 90 or 95% of all tax court cases are actually removed from the docket because they're resolved at those pre-trial conferences with IRS counsel. Some of those get kicked back to appeals for final resolution. And some of them are resolved on the spot. So the IRS has a lot of programs in place. You know, there's the mediation process that's out there now, and that's been slowly expanding over the past few years. That's another effort to try to keep things out of the court system. So The fact that they have all these processes to prevent litigation obviously indicates that there is a breakdown in the way that IRS functions are working in the field. And that is the reason why the collection due process appeal in particular, which is mostly what we'll be talking about today, why that was created by the IRS Restructuring and Reauthorization Act of 1998. It is the CDP appeal itself is one of the most significant things that came from that piece of legislation in terms of actual ability to help your clients. The mission of appeals is to, quote, resolve tax controversies without litigation on a basis which is fair and impartial to both the government and the taxpayer, and in a manner that will enhance voluntary compliance and public confidence in the integrity and efficiency of the service. This is obviously a difficult mission for them to achieve when you have other divisions of the IRS that are doing things that erode public confidence in the integrity of the service. So appeals has a big job, and it's a difficult job. The thing is that in my experience, people that work in appeals, because they have this independence, because they have this very specific mission, appeals is just overall a much more relaxed place than, say, collections or examination. They still obviously have an enforcement function, but because of their mission, because of the personnel that are promoted into appeals, they just have a different mindset, I think, and they're much more laid back. They do not have quotas on collections, things like that. So I think they're much easier to work with. They're much more agreeable. And again, because they're trying to prevent litigation, they are given more latitude than, say, an RO or RA out in the field, okay? So what does appeals handle? What do they do? In general, disputed tax liabilities, okay? So either the amount of the tax or collection action on the tax, okay? That's basically what they handle. So they handle examination appeals, exempt organization applications, the appeals on those, on the 1023s, employee plan appeals, and then obviously the tools that we use, the collection due process appeal, the collection appeals program, EH's equivalent hearings, so for taxpayers that are outside the criteria for a CDP appeal, you can still get a hearing with appeals. It's just you don't get some of the protections. Also, if an offer in compromise is rejected, appeals looks at those. If a revenue officer or campus appeals coordinator has, thrown out there the trust fund recovery penalty against your client, well, you can appeal that assessment through appeals as well. So appeals actually handles a ton of stuff. And there are appeals offices in most major cities across the country. And so they do have a lot of staff. But we'll see if any of that gets cut with the pending budget cuts. So far, through the last several years of budget cuts, appeals has not been impacted nearly as much as ACS, the field collection function, and just frontline customer service, information return processing. Those departments are the ones that have gotten hit the most by the budget cuts. But as there may be less and less fat to trim, so to speak, in those departments, who knows? The agency might be looking at appeals to seeing what they can trim there, which I think would be a travesty personally, because this is such a useful arm of the IRS. But keep that in mind. It's something that I'm very keenly following. As we look at the forthcoming budget fight that I'm sure will take up most of the summer in the news headlines. So it is time for polling question number 1. And I have an amazing announcement. All of our polling questions are completely different. I changed all of them. Can you believe that?
Oh, yay.
Can you believe that? However,
Believe it.
They're all still stupid dad jokes.
I was going to say, I don't know if they're going to be, other than something new, is it going to be, what does a clown say when you hold the door open for her? Stop clowning around, honk, honk, or thank you for the nice gesture.
Get it? Jester?
Yeah.
Jester?
Yeah.
It sounds like your mic is working. So.
It is. You have the memory issues. I had to reboot the GoTo webinar to get it to work right again.
Yeah, as a general rule, I reboot my computer before every one of these webinars just to avoid those kind of problems. Steven says, I need the scotch. That must be a reaction to the joke. Hey, we have 100%. Oh my gosh. Everybody. Oh, wait, now we're back down to 96. What happened? Did somebody change their...
I don't know how that happened. Somebody took the answer back.
Submit button. There we go. I'm closing it while it's still 100%. Dan, anything you want to add in on the stuff I've already covered? Mission, appeals, and any introductory, I guess, kind of stuff that you would like to say about appeals?
I think the thing would be just in general that it's very important that people pay attention to what you say here, because the thing about appeals is you have a very limited window to get a ticket to go visit them.
Right.
And you have to know when that window is open, because I read a lot of tax court cases where, and even one recently where the guy apparently didn't exhaust one route of determining the liability to even question it in appeals. So it's just one of those things that you just really need to pay attention to when that door opens and when it closes.
Yes. I personally believe that out of all the material that we teach across levels 1, 2, 3, and 4 of this entire program, I actually think this is the most important part, hands down, because appeals is such an important part of your arsenal at your disposal for resolving your client cases. I realize some people will probably dispute that with me about the utility, but trust me, when you start doing hundreds of cases and you see how many of them go to appeals, and how something that you talked with the revenue officer about, that the revenue officer was fighting you tooth and nail about, and then you get to appeals and the settlement officer is like, yeah, sure, okay, fine. And it's done in 5 minutes, something you were arguing with a revenue officer for 2 months over, it just really solidifies in your mind the importance of playing nice with appeals. So, all right. So who are these people? There are 4 general folks that you will interact with in the appeals division. Okay, and I don't think it's necessarily important that you don't confuse appeals officers with settlement officers, but they are different, right? And they do have different authorities. So we'll cover it here. So settlement officers are exactly that. They are looking to settle collections matters. So they deal primarily with CDPs and CAPs. Okay, these are the folks you are going to be talking to. Appeals officers are on the examination side. So if there is any dispute as to the validity of the assessment, if you are appealing an examination, if you are doing an audit reconsideration, if you're doing a doubt as to liability offer in compromise, denial, appeal, okay, anything regarding the actual, questioning the amount due, you're going to be talking to appeals officers. So settlement officers are collections, appeals are exam. That's the general way to look at it. And then obviously these folks have managers, and most of the resolutions that either settlement or appeals officers propose have to be signed off on by a manager, okay? So the appeals team managers, for the place they hold in the hierarchy, and for the GS pay level that they're at, they have a significant amount of authority, okay? Compared to people that are higher up the food chain, theoretically on either management or pay scale, appeals team managers have a lot of leeway. And then the support staff are the account resolution specialists. They assist both settlement officers and appeals officers, and they're the folks, they're going to say, hey, I need a 433, or can you get me a copy of this tax return, etc. Okay, you're going to be speaking with them mostly through fax and snail mail, but they're good people to treat right. So that's the hierarchy here. So let's talk about appeals hearings themselves. If you're used to working with a revenue officer that is cranky or belligerent or whatnot, you may be up for a shock the first time you get to appeals, okay, depending on the person you get at appeals. But appeals hearings are intentionally informal, okay? They're a lot more laid back than any conference calls you have with an RO, a group manager in collections, definitely revenue agents. For those of you that do examination work, God bless you, because I don't know how you can deal with those people. But the hearings are informal, very laid back. It's more of a conversation than a confrontation, okay? Whereas a lot of conversations with revenue officers, and especially group managers under collections out in the field, they are very confrontational, or they can be, okay? Whereas appeals is legitimately okay, let's hash this out, what do we need to make this go away? It is a lot of how those conversations can be. They do have a primary job of verifying that procedures as outlined under the Internal Revenue Code and the Internal Revenue Manual and relevant revenue procedures have been followed. Okay, this is part of their preventing litigation. So a very common example, and this is commonly used as a part of a tax protester argument, is that there are certain conditions that need to be met in order for a tax lien to be valid, okay? And so you can find websites out there run by tax protesters saying, oh, you got to do a FOIA request, this, and this, to make sure the procedures were met, otherwise the tax lien's invalid, okay? Most of those arguments are bogus, by the way. But part of what appeals does is verify that, yes, those procedures were actually followed, that the notice periods that we talk about in, what class is that? The IRS collections notice cycle, right? The timelines that we talk about in that class, appeals has to verify that those timelines were met, okay? And verify that the notices actually went out, right? So they're reviewing the files from revenue officers to make sure that they're looking at the certified mail dates. They're looking at those kind of things. Okay. So once they've done that, they're also going to evaluate the case from a big picture perspective and try to determine whether or not it's frivolous. Okay. And you know, frivolity is very subjective, right? So, but there are rules within the IRM that they reference for this. And you and I would hope, are more or less on the same page of what's frivolous and what's not. Appeals enforces this duty to, from their mission statement, or that connects to their mission statement, and they balance collection action with the need for efficient collection as well as the legitimate concern of the taxpayer that any collection action be no more intrusive than necessary. That's another thing that came out of the RAH of 98, the Restructuring and Reauthorization Act. Just refer to it as the RAH. The RAH is what brought us the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, okay? And a lot of collection action out in the field can be very intrusive, okay? Now, my definition of excessively intrusive is almost always different than the client's definition of excessively intrusive, right? The taxpayer might think, what, you want a copy of my bank statements? That's excessively intrusive. No, it's not. But the IRS wanting to catalog every one of your possessions in order to nitpick over the value of your clothing, your furniture, knickknacks, everything like that you had just lumped together as one line item on the 433A as, quote, household effects. Okay, if they're going to go to that level, that would be excessively intrusive, right? So appeals is going to look at the case history, especially the written notes from the revenue officer, to look for those kind of things that the taxpayer might come back and say, look, I'm going to sue the federal government because this was excessively intrusive and a violation of my rights, under the Internal Revenue Code as codified with the passage of the RAH of 98, okay? Because those arguments do make it through court, okay? And those are district court actions, not tax court actions, all right? And it takes away resources from other things for the Department of Justice to get involved and all that nonsense, right? So they look for those kind of things where, so to sum it up, appeals is looking for places where revenue officers and revenue agents may have overstepped their bounds, okay? So you can bring those things up to appeals, especially because a lot of times a group manager in the field doesn't care and ain't going to listen, okay? But you can take that up with appeals and they will listen. Now, there are limitations, though, with appeals. And a big part of this, and this comes out of the AJAC project that I'll talk about here in a second, but it really is important to know your client case history. You want to go into these engagements with a thorough interview of your client and also a thorough review of everything that they have at their disposal. And there may be times where you aren't comfortable taking the engagement because of something you find or that they say, okay? I will usually walk away from an engagement that sounds kind of sketchy from the taxpayer's perspective. I know other people that take those engagements, but they will do a FOIA on the revenue officer's case file or the revenue agent's case file, okay? So that you can find what's in the notes on the IRS side, okay? I have always chosen to simply walk away from those cases because there's plenty of other business out there. But if you're willing to take those cases, you can charge a pretty hefty premium on those, by the way, especially for all the hours and hours you got to spend sifting through a Freedom of Information Act response. But in appeals, you can't raise issues that were already resolved or considered in previous appeals or litigation. So, for example, if there was previous litigation in relation to whether a certain individual was a willful and responsible individual in relation to the trust fund recovery penalty, and that was settled in a previous tax court case for this taxpayer, you can't bring the same issue up again for the same individual in relation to the same business for a future 941 debt. Okay, appeals is not going to consider that argument because they're just going to point to the tax court case and say, look, you already lost on this argument. Sorry, too bad, so sad. Okay. So let's talk about AJAC. This is a project that started in 2012. It is an extension of a couple of things. One, an increase in appeals work because of the 2011 Fresh Start program, and also in response to some bad PR, basically, in various other branches of the agency. So this is an improvement project. It stands for Appeals Judicial Approach and Culture. And what the name is kind of wonky, but if you break it down, what they're trying to do is instill a culture within appeals personnel of looking at their job, even though they're administrative in nature, but they want their staff to view their job as from a judicial approach. Okay, and so a judicial approach has to do with independence, right? The bench in this country is supposed to be entirely, non-prejudicial to either party in any kind of litigation. So the goal here is for appeals to basically embrace that as well. So part of this is to increase the independence and the distance between appeals and other IRS functions, okay? So that is why we have rules about whether, when you have a CDP or a CAP hearing, the settlement officer can't have had a prior involvement in the case. And if they have, they need to recuse themselves and get it assigned to another settlement officer. This is also why it's not uncommon for appeals cases to be assigned to other cities, okay? So, for example, you guys know that I worked primarily in 5 Western states while I was running my practice, and the majority of my appeals cases got sent to the Albuquerque office, and the reason for that is because some of the appeals officers in like Phoenix or Denver or Salt Lake, they may have had they may personally know the revenue officer that I'm dealing with, because those were the major cities that I was pulling clients from. I was mainly operating in Denver, Salt Lake City, Las Vegas, and Phoenix. Those were my primary big city markets for my trucking clients. And so things would get kicked to Albuquerque because of the lack of any personal or professional history with the revenue officer I was working with. Okay, so I got to know the Albuquerque appeals office pretty well for a few years. Right? Under AJAC, the appeals division also, quote, owns the process. Okay, so before AJAC, the case would still be in inventory in other divisions, right? Collections or exam, right? But when appeals takes on a case now, they own it, all right? So, and it's theirs to resolve, okay? And collections and exam are bound by the decision of appeals, okay? That's a pretty big deal. So it's important to understand that appeals, they do not assess tax, they do not research the problem, they do not investigate, they do not do examinations, they do not issue levies, they do not take on enforced collections action, okay? They are mediators. Their job is to resolve disputes, okay? That is their job, okay? In 2013, part of this process under AJAC was to further clarify that appeals officers cannot take a, quote, investigatory approach to working appeals. What this means is that they are not there to seek out additional information. They're not going to question things. Basically, they are there to take the taxpayer's word, your word, my word, as well as revenue officer's word on the validity of the information presented. Okay? So for example, one of the big things that goes into RCP calculations on an offer and compromise is the asset valuations, right? That is something that can be very questionable. So in a settlement officer, they will not look at the 433 AOIC and say, you know, I don't understand how this 1975 Ford Pinto has a valuation on here of $5,000. I don't get that, okay? They may think it, but they are not supposed to bring it up, all right? You have to bring it up, all right? So they will not themselves seek to change the asset valuation and say, you know, maybe that car is only really worth $200, okay? You have to bring it up. Or the revenue officer has to bring it up. Or an offer examiner has to bring it up, okay? Appeals, the settlement officer, that's not their job. And they are explicitly instructed not to be what we call first finder of fact, all right? In fiscal year 14, they said that appeals will no longer raise new issues in hearings, so again, just a furthering of that same thing. But they did make a pretty significant change for cases that are underdeveloped. So for example, let's say a revenue officer never secured a complete 433 and did a full financial analysis, okay? RO didn't do their job. But you get a CDP opportunity, you take it to appeals. Instead of sending the case back down to collections to complete the financial analysis, appeals will retain jurisdiction of the case. This is huge when you have a revenue officer that is just being words I can't say on a webinar, okay? So if they're being belligerent, uncooperative, they're trying to railroad your client, and you get an appeals opportunity, take it, all right? Because appeals will retain jurisdiction of the case rather than kicking it back down, okay? That's huge. And that came about in fiscal year 14. Also, new offers and compromise that are submitted within appeals as part of the resolution alternative that you enter into with a settlement officer, those are also retained in appeals jurisdiction. They're processed at the offer and compromise centers just like any other OIC, but appeals retains jurisdiction, okay? It doesn't get kicked back to the revenue officer in those situations. That's also huge, okay? Outside of collections due process appeals, this is maybe not a huge thing since offers and compromise aren't really that big of a that common of a collection option, but OIC rejections and appeals will no longer incur additional collection alternatives. So for example, within a CDP, at the CDP hearing, the settlement option agreed to as an OIC, appeals will retain jurisdiction while OIC centers process the OIC, and if there is a rejection of that OIC, appeals will retain it, but only under CDP circumstances, okay? If it's a cap appeal or anything else, then it'll get kicked back to collections, okay? So understand that how appeals can handle collection alternatives differs between the CDP program and the CAP program. Does that make sense? CAP is Collection Appeals Program. We'll talk about that in the second hour. Does that make sense though? I may have not explained that very well. Okay. So if you get to appeals through a CDP, appeals will retain jurisdiction of an OIC rejection. If you get to appeals through a CAP, appeals will kick an OIC rejection back to collections. Maybe that's a better way of saying it. Does that make sense? Can I get some yays or nays?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. Yes. Thanks, Melissa. Anybody else? Is everybody awake? Frankie, thank you. Okay. I just want to make sure. So another thing that came out of the fiscal year 14 AJAC changes was that appeals will not make determinations about whether or not a notice of federal tax lien should or should not be filed. Okay, so you're probably aware, if you remember from our level 1 IA and CNC class, where there are 6 types of installment agreements. Okay, a couple of them require the filing or the determination of whether or not a notice of federal tax lien should be filed. In CNC, currently not collectible cases, a notice of federal tax lien filing determination is theoretically always supposed to be made. Okay, that determination will not be made by appeals. Okay, so if your collection action in appeals, the resolution you reach is non-collectible status, for example, then appeals will not go through the process of determining whether or not a tax lien should be filed if it hasn't already. So think about that. Dan, what does that potentially get you? Potentially. Dan? Maybe he lost his microphone again. What that gets you is that if a tax lien has not already been filed against the taxpayer and you get non-collectible status in appeals, they won't file the tax lien. It gets kicked back to collections, and you might skate under the radar, especially if there's no revenue officer involved. If it just goes to ACS, and a tax lien might never get filed. That's what might happen. Okay? That's why I always say take advantage of your appeals opportunities as soon as you possibly can. Okay? All right. So again, big picture, appeals does not want to be the, quote, first finder of fact. They are not an investigatory arm. Okay? Examination, collections, they are investigatory in nature. They're digging up dirt. Appeals is not there to dig up dirt. Okay? They are there to make determinations about whether the dirt is important or not. Okay? So bigger picture, out of the AJAC project is basically, this is my interpretation, is a message to the collection field function, so the revenue officers inside SBSE, to do their jobs. That's basically what it comes down to. But again, with budget cuts, losses of revenue officers through retirement, and attrition to the private sector, well, their caseloads are going up. You know, revenue officers are only supposed to have caseloads of about 35 to 45 cases. There's revenue officers out there with 60, 70 cases on their desk. Okay, so what's an RO to do? And so undeveloped cases end up in appeals. All right, time for our next polling question. Usually we see
What did the police officer say to the man with the bees in his car? Got honey? I pulled you over because I thought you were buzzed. Where am I? What is it?
Buzzed. Bzz.
Yes. I pulled you over because I thought you were buzzed. Yes.
I just want to say, usually we have a lot more question activity in the questions panel. and there have been none so far. So
everybody's just intently listening to you, absorbing everything you have to say.
either that, or the green beer is already flowing on this St. Patty's Day.
Could be that. Could be the corned beef and cabbages affecting their stomachs.
Ooh, that sounds good.
See, at least us on the East Coast, we've already had lunch.
That's true. Yes, it does sound amazing. There's one more of you that needs to submit your vote. I don't know who you are. One more of you. I got 5 seconds to hit that submit button, whomever
Did you see
thou art.
Clint's reply? Unbelievable.
Yeah, it's kind of a groaner. All right, closing the poll. Yes, and the leftover, yeah, definitely good sandwiches.
Corned beef and cabbage?
Yeah. All right, CDPs. How many CDPs do you file a year right now, Dan?
Haven't gotten into having to do too many of those. So.
Well, last year.
Let's see. I don't know, 2, 3. I don't have as many cases that I need to have it. Fortunately, I've been good with revenue officers over here. So
cool. You're one of the lucky ones then. So again, this whole process of collection due process appeals comes out of the IRS Restructuring and Reauthorization Act of '98, and specifically provides the right to a hearing in several specific cases. One is the filing of a federal tax lien. Another is the receipt of a final notice of intent to levy, an LT11 or letter 1058, which is the most common thing that we file those on. Notice of a jeopardy levy. So jeopardy levies are situations where a revenue officer with sign-off from a group manager has made a determination that the taxpayer is going to abscond with funds in some way, shape, or form, or dispose of an asset that the IRS should have rights to. And so a jeopardy levy is to seize that money before the taxpayer can, wire it down to the Cayman Islands or whatever. So that's a jeopardy levy. And then also you have appeals rights on levies or notices of intent to levy on your state tax refund. Okay, so those are the 4 primary things. The one that will do the most is the LT11 or the letter 1058. That's where most of these CDPs are filed. Why file a CDP? The biggest thing that you get with CDP is you get a stay of enforcement. Okay, the case gets kicked over to appeals, and they don't do levies. They don't do wage garnishments, right? They don't take enforcement action. And so while appeals has jurisdiction, you have time away from levy action. But keep in mind that this is only for the tax periods covered by the CDP. Okay, an example might be a taxpayer owes for, say, 2010 through 2016. Well, their CDP appeals rights on the 10 through 15 have already long expired. Okay, there's only a 30-day window after the 1058 is issued. But they just filed and got assessed their 2016 liability. So they're not actually going to get the 1058 or the LT11 on their 2016 1040 liability. If they file their return now, they're probably not going to get that until like July or August. Okay? So this coming July or August, they will have a CDP opportunity, and the IRS won't take enforced collections action against their 2016 liability. But only the 2016 liability is covered by the stay of enforcement. The IRS can still take enforcement action on the 10 through 15. Now, that's what's covered by law and procedure. In practicality, if a case is assigned to a revenue officer, okay, so it's outside of the automated levy system, okay, the revenue officer sends the entire case to appeals and it's out of their life and they're not issuing levies on the other periods, okay? Can they? Yes. Do they? Rarely. Have I seen it happen? A couple of times. But it's rare, okay? So if they have, but if they're an ACS and they file a CDP on one tax period, it's still in the automated computerized levy program, so they can still get whacked for tax periods not covered by the CDP. CDPs also buy you time to fix your client, okay? CDPs are, remember all those things that we listed earlier that they have to deal with? CDPs are their lowest priority item, despite the fact that CDPs are over 3/4 of the entire case inventory handled by appeals, okay? But all the other things have higher priority, right? So when I was in practice, it was typically about 4 months for these hearings to occur. I've been hearing it's closer to 6 to 8 months in some parts of the country for these. Actually, somebody told me that out in Long Island, that the appeals office out there has almost a year backlog on appeals, okay, on CDP hearings. So you can use that to your advantage, all right? This is one of those things where the case inventory is to your benefit, okay? Melissa asks, can you get a levy released with a CDP? No, that's for caps. Okay, we'll talk about that in a little bit. So the time that a CDP buys you, right, is pretty significant. It gives you time to file unprepared returns. It gives you time to get bookkeeping caught up, right? It gives you time to get payroll set up and get the S-Corp shareholders, you know, drawing reasonable compensation, okay? It gives you time to do all that stuff. And 4 months is more than enough time to fix just about any small business. It's definitely more than enough
Jason?
time to fix the 1040s. Go ahead.
What about the, because I'm sure there's some people that they probably haven't thought of it yet, but what about the CSED in this process?
I'm going to get there.
Okay.
Okay. So yeah, appeals is your friend. And remember, their job is to prevent litigation. Steven says, yeah, time for the client to accumulate money to pay the IRS. Absolutely. So why file a CDP? Again, approximately half of all my installment agreements in my career have been granted in appeals as a result of CDPs. And remember, 3/4 of your cases are going to be on a payment plan, okay? They're not going to be in C&C. They're not going to be offers and compromise. The vast majority of them are going to be on a payment plan, okay? Now, like Dan just said, there is one big problem with the CDP process, okay? It tolls the CSED, okay? The collection statute expiration date, CSED, is extended day for day, every day that you're waiting on that appeals hearing, okay? And 30 days after you get a resolution, okay? So if you have a taxpayer that is, my general rule of thumb is I become very concerned with this. Like it's kind of a red flag for me. If the taxpayer is within 3 years or less of the CSED, okay? If they're within 3 years or less, that's just my personal rule of thumb, then I am very cautious about taking any action that extends that time period. Okay? And CDPs and offers and compromise are the two most common things that extend the 10-year statute of limitations. Okay? Because when the 10 years is up, the debt is gone. Don't forget that. Okay, as long as the government hasn't taken it to district court and reduced it to judgment, which they rarely do in most of the cases we deal with, okay, after the 10 years, the debt is gone. Okay, and 30 days later, the tax lien has to be released. So be aware that if you're waiting around 6 months for a CDP hearing, you're extending the CSED by 7 months. Okay, because it's the 6 months plus 30 days. All right. So does that answer your question, Dan?
Yeah, that's it. You know, and again, this is one of those things where I've seen a few cases where you need to make sure that you know when it's filed, what the time frame is, because there was one case that I read about where it came back to bite the guy in regards to an estate that he was handling, a few $100,000 estate that he thought it went away, and I think that one particular case, the service was able to reduce it to a judgment or do something in particular because he was off by, like, I don't know, 10 days, 2 weeks, something like that.
Correct. Yeah, it was a pretty significant tax court case. I think it was last year, wasn't it? Last April or May?
Yeah.
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 It was a pretty interesting case. We talked about it on the podcast, didn't we?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so go listen to the old podcast episodes on iTunes, and we talked about that. So where do we find out about our CDP rights? Well, if the taxpayer brings you a stack of stuff and there's an LT11 or a letter 1058 or a notice of federal tax lien or a notice of jeopardy levy or a notice of state tax refund levy, you have CDP appeals rights. Okay? You can also find them in the transcripts. And this is why, even though the automated transcript review tools are valuable that are out there, you know, like Audit Detective and Canopy, this is why I still highly suggest you still look at the actual transcripts, because those tools may not always catch all the transaction codes that give you appeals rights. All right? So look on the transcripts. If you see final notice of intent to levy mailed, okay, and it hasn't been 30 days yet, bam, you still have CDP appeals rights. Okay? Danielle, I don't know the party names for that tax court case off the top of my head. Dan, I don't know if you have that handy or not. If you do, if you can pop it into the chat window. The statutory authority for appeals, 6320, is the right to appeal a notice of federal tax lien. 6330 covers the right to appeal proposed levies and actual levies. Okay, and with that, polling question number 3, and then we will get into the nitty-gritty of how the CDP process works. Why doesn't Dracula have any friends? That whole coffin thing, or because he's a pain in the neck? Wow, a lot of you are choosing the oy vey answer.
That could be a reason.
Yeah, Dan, do you have those the party names to that case?
That's what I was trying to look up and see what I could find.
Okay.
Because it was, I can't remember it exactly, but I think this whole thing stemmed back from somewhere back in the early days of the appeals that came about in the RARA 98, if I remember correctly.
Okay. If we can find that during the course of the webinar, we'll get that up for you, Danielle.
Yeah, I'll post it if I find it.
Okay. All right. So, a couple big red flags for you. And these are statutory, not procedural. There are limits on appeals. Okay? So, under Title 26, Section 6320, Paragraph B, Subparagraph 2, taxpayers are only entitled to one appeals hearing per tax type and tax period. But this applies to liens and levies separately. Melissa, this goes back to your question, okay, about getting a levy released. Okay, so a taxpayer is entitled to one consideration from appeals for every tax type and tax period. Okay, but you can appeal liens and levies separately. All right, so it's actually possible to kind of overload appeals with one case. I don't recommend doing that. It's easier and better to wrap up everything in one fell swoop. But if you really, really need to delay a case for some reason, then this is a way you could do it. But just be aware of the limitations. Also, it is important for you to know that they, being the IRS, is only required by law to tell you one time that they're going to levy. Okay? So you'll notice that you get, referring back to the IRS collections notice cycle class, usually the bare bones introductory class that I teach, the CP 504 is the first levy notice warning, right? Then the LT 11 or letter 1058 is the final notice of intent to levy. They send two as a courtesy because they're nice fellas, okay? But they're only required to send you one, okay? So be aware of that. Also, there's this thing, we kind of refer to it as the, quote, the refresher letter, the letter 3174. This is a letter that a revenue officer or even ACS will send this once a year, every 6 months to an active case, just to remind you that they can levy you at any time, okay? That letter is a courtesy by procedure under the IRM. It is not required by law, okay? So, limits and notification requirements. Be aware of that, okay? So you can't do a CDP on a 3174, okay? It's not gonna go anywhere. Okay? The IRS must offer you the right to a hearing, but can still proceed with levy action in certain cases. Okay? Jeopardy levies. If you're about to, if they believe you're about to wire the money down to the Cayman Islands, okay, they're still going to levy you. State tax refunds. Okay, they're going to intercept your state tax refund, even if you file a CDP. If you are a federal contractor, okay, the Treasury Offset Program is going to intercept payments on federal contracts going to your business, all right, regardless of this CDP appeal protection. And then the first one you see there is the one I'm going to spend the most time explaining. There is something called a disqualified employment tax levy. And if you actually read through the part of the Internal Revenue Code or the IRM that discusses this, they make it overly complex, okay? DETLs, though, are actually fairly straightforward. And what the disqualified means is that you're disqualified from appeals protection from the levy, okay? So here's what it is. If you have had an ongoing payroll tax problem and you keep accumulating more and more 941 debt, okay, and you have a CDP hearing, and whether something comes out of it or not, maybe you get on a payment plan and then you blow up the payment plan. Maybe you get into CNC for a while, but then business does great and you lose your CNC status. Whatever the resolution is, even if there is no resolution out of appeals, okay? For the next 2 years, After that CDP hearing, and it's calendar years, just for the record, for the next 2 calendar years, you cannot get protection from levy action by filing a CDP if you accumulate more payroll tax debt, okay? So another way of looking at that is it's a 2-year look back, right? If you file a CDP request, the support staff is going to look at your account history, and they're going to look, oh, you had a CDP hearing for 941 taxes on this same EIN 18 months ago or 23 months ago, okay? And they're going to send you a letter saying we cannot, you're not going to get the protection. What you're going to get is an equivalent hearing, okay? But you do not get all the protections for an actual CDP hearing, okay? So you're going to get your hearing, but it's going to be an EH, an equivalent hearing. And levy action can and does still happen, okay? Any questions on that? Seeing none, we continue. Appeals is a hurry up and wait process. I already talked about this. Use the time wisely to get your client fixed, okay? There's always another word I want to use that I can't say. But you want to get them out of their hole, okay? From a payroll perspective, a federal tax deposit perspective, a quarterly estimated tax payment perspective, W-4 withholding perspective, whatever you got to do, use this time wisely, okay? Expect a request for information, okay? So a lot of these cases, like I talked about earlier, they go to appeals and they're not fully developed yet by collections, okay? In order to consider a collection alternative, okay, meaning a collection alternative is an alternative to levy action, such as a payment plan or non-collectible status, offer and compromise, etc. Okay, appeals will request full financial documentation. Sometimes even in cases that meet streamline criteria. Always save those letters. Obviously, make a note of who calls you. And then when you get the letter that schedules your appeals hearing, make note of whether they're calling you or you're supposed to call them, okay? The letter will spell that out. It's not always the same, okay? You know, it'll be about 50-50 if they call you and you call them at the designated time, okay? And don't miss it. If you miss your hearing, it's gone. Too bad, so sad, okay? If you have to reschedule it, do it in advance, okay? So this is a situation where sometimes it's good to have, you know, 2 people on the power of attorney. So if you have multiple attorneys, EAs, CPAs in your office, it's good to tag team, you know, in case one person gets sick or you know, the kids get sick and you know, you miss a CDP on that day. This is why it's a good practice to have 2 people on power of attorney. Dan, do you put Heather on your 2848s? Both of you?
Yes, I've got Heather on my power of attorneys as well as my new EA that I hired at the beginning of tax season. So
good. It'll help you in these kind of situations. Okay. Now,
very much so.
Yeah, if you either miss that 30-day window, because you have 30 days after receipt of the IRS notice that gives you CDP rights to file the CDP. Okay, if you miss that 30-day window, you can still request an equivalent hearing within 1 year. You also get placed into equivalent hearing category if you are in a disqualified employment tax levy situation, okay? Now, there actually are some benefits to the equivalent hearing. The biggest one is it doesn't stop the clock on the CSED. Okay? That is the single biggest reason to do an equivalent hearing. You can actually, by the way, you can actually request an equivalent hearing instead of a CDP hearing. Okay? It's just a box, and we'll get to the form here in a second. But you can request an equivalent hearing instead. Okay? There's no suspension of collections action. The jurisdiction retention that we talked about as part of the AJAC project does not happen. Okay, so collections, the revenue officer still retains the ownership of your case. And then also equivalent hearings do not come with tax court rights. Okay, so those are what you miss out on for an equivalent hearing. But for some cases, not stopping the clock on the CSED is actually a good thing. Appeals outcomes. So you'll have a hearing, you'll have a conversation, you'll work through the issues, and then one of two things is going to come out of that: either an agreement or no agreement. If you come to agreement, the IRS is going to the settlement officer is going to send you a form 12257, waiver of appeals notice of determination in a collection due process hearing. Okay, they send you this form so that they don't have to do the formal write-up, the notice of determination, on the case. Okay, and those write-ups are usually 3 or 4 pages, and it takes them, an hour or two to write them. So if they don't have to write them, they're not going to. So they're going to ask you to waive the notice of determination. All right. However, if you waive the notice of determination, you're also waiving tax court rights on that agreement. Okay? So you are not required to sign it. Okay? As a courtesy, I think it is, if you reach an agreement with the settlement officer or appeals officer, as a courtesy, I think it is best to tell them at the end of the appeals hearing whether or not you are intending to sign the waiver. Okay? I signed very, very few of them. Most of them, I want the written determination, and I want to preserve my client's tax court rights. Okay? But there are cases where it's really cut and dried. There's really nothing to dispute, and we just say, fine, yeah, I'll sign the 12257. Get me send me, fax over the 12257 and the 433D. We'll sign the waiver and we'll get the installment agreement set up today. Let's just wrap this up and go. Okay? So there are situations where you just want the timeliness of that process. Okay? If no agreement is reached, they will issue a notice of determination, and that does come with tax court rights. Now, my favorite treasury agency outside of the body of IRS happens to be TIGTA. I'm a huge TIGTA fan. And TIGTA is the auditor of the IRS, okay? The procedural auditor. TIGTA does probably a dozen or 2 dozen studies, audits a year, and they're always fascinating. So in 2012, they did an internal audit of CDP effectiveness, okay? And what they found was no improvement in the deficiencies that they had identified in their prior assessment several years earlier of appeals. They found computational errors on collection statute expiration dates, okay? So I recommend that you do your own CSED calculations. And fortunately, that's one of the things that the software tools that we all use, like Canopy and Pitbull and Audit Detective, that's one thing they're really, really great for, okay? So make sure that the CSEDs are calculated right. Appeals also failed to properly document their impartiality, okay? In the notice of determination, there will usually be a paragraph that addresses the independence and impartiality. Okay, it'll say to the effect of, you know, settlement officer has had no prior involvement with this case, has no relationship with the revenue officer, blah, blah, blah. Okay. There have also been classification issues, especially how things get coded into the IRS computer systems. This TIGTA audit is part of what prompted the AJAC project. But note that it's been 5 years, they are due, probably overdue at this point, for another one of these CDP effectiveness audits. I'm really hoping that this is the year they do it. So be on the lookout for this. Hopefully some of these issues have been addressed. But people are people, so don't count on it. The reason I point this out is so that you're aware of the big issues that TIGTA found with the CDP process, okay? And polling question number 4. What's the best reason to move to Switzerland? Any comments on the CDP stuff, Dan?
No, nothing at this time, but I think I found the article, so I'm going to...
Oh, perfect.
The article that I referenced, it actually also has the court case. It's a tax advisor one that I
Cool, thank you.
Found, so I just now posted that link.
Awesome.
It actually talks about the guy thinking he's, the IRS said he did file a CDP hearing, but then later was trying to say, I take it back, and then did an equivalent hearing, so because of the whole CSED thing, that's what came back to bite him, you know, in the end.
Right, so he was arguing that he filed the CDP late, so his hearing was actually an equivalent hearing, and therefore the CSED should not have told. That was the basis of
Correct.
That. Yeah.
Correct.
So, and it was more recent than I thought it was...
and of course, they took the 6 months to try and review it, or you know, I think the paperwork got lost, because I think, again, if I remember correctly, it was one of those where something happened early on. I'm just trying to
7 years. It took 7 years for the government to resolve this case with this guy. 7 years.
Right.
Wow. Yeah, it's worth reading. It's a really good case. Thanks for finding that, Dan.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay. All right, everybody has voted. What's the best reason to move to Switzerland? I don't know, but I'll tell you, the flag sure is a big plus. In case you didn't know, the flag of Switzerland is a giant red flag.
I get it. I get it now.
Yeah. I'm surprised only one person selected cheap college tuition for foreigners. In case you're not aware of this, this has nothing to do with what we're talking about, but there are several countries in Europe where foreigners pay resident tuition rates. And there are programs in Switzerland, Germany, Denmark, and the Netherlands that I am aware of. Those are only 4 I've looked at. But they have degree programs that are taught entirely in English. Okay? So you don't have to learn German or French or Italian or Dutch or whatever. You can take the entire program in language. And some of these schools are some of the top schools in the world. Like in Switzerland, I actually considered going there for my master's degree in financial engineering at EPFL in Lausanne. And it would have been like $700 a semester. Okay, so again, if you have kids or yourself, you just want to get away and pursue higher education outside the country, Switzerland is actually a pretty good place to do it. Anyway, moving on.
Glad you never told my daughter that.
Oh no, she be sure to tell Brooke.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My wife doesn't want her to go. She wants to go to a school in California, let alone to Switzerland.
Sure. It's about the same length of a flight, you know.
Probably.
No, it is. Anyway, So CDP hearings. Remember, you can file a CDP on liens and levies, okay? And again, Melissa, I will get to your questions. So can you file a CDP on a levy, on an actual levy? Yes, you can. However, I never have personally, and I don't recommend it. The reason is because of that 4 to 6 months, okay? By then, the bank has already transferred the money to the IRS because of the 21-day hold, okay? That's why you do a cap appeal instead, all right? And we'll talk about caps next. But this is the CDP form. Pretty straightforward. It's one of the simpler IRS forms. Taxpayer name, ID number, address, telephone number, and best time to call. That means your phone number and best time to call, okay? I try to avoid ever putting taxpayer phone numbers on any IRS form ever. Let's see. So taxpayer 2. So the heart of this form is section 5 here. The type of tax, the tax form number, and the tax period. You must list very specifically the tax type, form, and period, all right? So over here, you know, if you are, let's say you're filing a CDP, you're appealing the assessment of a trust fund recovery penalty, okay? Common thing to appeal. Over here, you're going to put trust fund recovery penalty. What is the tax form number for a trust fund recovery penalty? There isn't one, okay? So you put the code section, 6672, okay? And then the tax period, list out specific quarters, quarter by quarter, year by year, okay? Don't put Q1-Q4 2010-2013. Don't do that, okay? Just like on a power of attorney, okay, on the 2848. List them out very specifically. So on both a POA and a CDP form, I'll put Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4, 2009, 2010, 2011, okay? I spell it out, okay? That's what they want to see. Laura asks, do you put the taxpayer's phone number on the power of attorney? No. My number goes on there as well. Okay? So spell it out. Now, the basis for your hearing request. Now, you can request a CDP on any of these things, all right? But when it comes down to brass tacks in the form, they want to know, is it about a lien or is it about a levy? Why is that? Remember, you only get one CDP per tax type and period, but you can get one each for levies and liens, okay? This is why. So they want to know, is it for the lien or something to do with a levy? Now, remember I said, let's say you don't want to toll the CSED, right? You don't want to stop the clock on the 10 years ticking away. Bam, whoops, they give you a box to check, okay? Check the box saying, I'd like an equivalent hearing. I have checked this box before, even though my client meets the requirements for a CDP, because I want the equivalent instead, okay? Why do you disagree with the filing of a lien or a levy? Okay. You can choose a collection alternative. You're going to enter a payment plan. You think you're eligible for an offer in compromise, or I cannot pay the balance. Okay. Dan, which of these boxes do you think I checked the most of during my career after they actually changed the form in 2013? The form used to be different. You had to write in, you know, installment agreement or whatever. Which box do you think I checked the most?
Probably installment agreement.
Exactly. Installment agreement is by far the most common box to check. I cannot pay is the second most common. Okay. Now, if it's in regards to a lien, and you think you're eligible for withdrawal, or you're going to do something with a subordination or a discharge that we'll talk about next Friday, okay, that is what you'll put here, and you can explain as well. So, for example, lien should not have been filed because we're going to request a withdrawal of the lien anyway, because if the lien's in place, I'm going to lose my security clearance, which means I'm going to lose my job, which means the IRS will never get a dime, and therefore it's in the best interest of the government not to have the lien out there. Okay, and that's what you put in this box. With the 2013 changes to this form, they also added another box, okay, which says, "Ain't my problem. It's his or hers." Okay, and you can point the finger. Okay, so there's a box there for innocent spouse as well. Now, if you are raising an issue about, say, like we mentioned earlier, so hopefully this is all starting to tie in together, okay, from the stuff earlier. If a revenue officer is being overly intrusive, invading the taxpayer's privacy, going above and beyond the call of duty to question expenses and asset valuations, guess what? Bam. That's what this other box is for, okay? Usually if I'm putting something in here, I'm usually also checking one of these, okay? Because usually I want to communicate to the settlement officer, look, we're trying to get an installment agreement, but the RO is being nitpicky about every cotton-picking thing on the stupid 433. All right? So I want it out of their hands. Just give me the installment agreement. Okay? So I'll usually indicate that here as well. Make sense? And then you can sign on behalf of the taxpayer, okay? So the taxpayer themselves does not have to sign this. I always make sure to, it should technically be in the CAF system by now, so they can look it up. But I always, check this box and attach a copy of my 2848 whenever I send these in, okay? Now, usually you're going to send this form to a revenue officer or to ACS, and then they forward it to appeals, okay? It is not uncommon to file a CDP. A revenue officer is going to call you, maybe their group manager might call you and say, why are you filing a CDP? I thought we were making progress. And you're going to say, no, I just need the 4 months. Or we need time to put together money, and this is the best way to go. Or I think you're being a fill in the blank, and I just don't want to deal with you anymore. Okay? It's okay to say that to a revenue officer. I've done it plenty of times. I think you're being too nitpicky about the asset valuations. So we're just going to take it to appeals. I just don't want to deal with you anymore. Have a nice day. Goodbye. Send it on to appeals. Well, I think we can resolve this. No. Send it to appeals. Well, I really think we can resolve this. No. Hush. I'm done with you. Send it to appeals. Okay? I've had those kind of conversations with revenue officers. ROs are pretty much the only people in the world that my normally bouncy, puppies and rainbows personality kind of goes away and the fangs come out. So there you go.
Jason?
Yeah.
Can I ask you a quick question on that?
Yeah.
What if you wanted them, maybe if do they get graded on that, I guess, or judged on that, from an evaluation standpoint? Is that a black market on them going to appeals? And would you consider, if they're willing to play ball or do that?
Sure. And I've had
depending on how much time you have left.
Absolutely. Absolutely. If they say, why are you filing an appeal, yeah, and sometimes I'll just say because it's their right. okay? Um, so sometimes I'll just be like that, but I have no qualm saying, look, there's no reason that this is still dragging out 3 months later. You should have given us the installment agreement 3 months ago. So in my opinion, you're the one holding up the resolution. You're the one holding up the government getting paid. And so I'm just going to take it to appeals and deal with them. Okay? Yes, occasionally you'll have an RO that says, all right, I get it. Fine. What do you want? Because yes, I don't know exactly how the evaluation system works. You can get quite a bit of information of that from the IRM though. And what I do know is that, yeah, they are somehow assessed on their case resolution percentage versus what has to get kicked up to appeals. I know that that is a small factor in their employee evaluations. Okay, so yeah. Oops.
Okay.
Form 12256, withdrawal of request for a collection due process. Okay, there is a form to withdraw your CDP request. Okay, and we actually basically already answered this question by the question Dan just asked. Why would you ever want to withdraw a CDP? Okay, this is why. If you submit the form 12153, okay, they are obligated to log it. Okay, so if you're having that conversation and they're like, okay, fine, let's work it out, all right, then and they're willing to have that conversation, then great, you work it out with them, and you have to send over a 12256 to withdraw your CDP request. Okay. Understand that if you withdraw your CDP request, you lose the rights to the hearing and the subsequent tax court rights as well. Okay? So be very cautious about this. Okay? But it's there, it's a tool. And be sure you understand what's here. That's why I made it its own slide. I give up my right to a hearing. I give up my right to tax court review. I give up my right to have appeals take over the case. I give up my right to the suspension of levy action. Okay? So this form is a pretty big deal. Be very, very judicious about actually deploying it. But yeah, there are cases where you're able to work something out with the revenue officer, and so you just keep it local. Our next polling question. What's the difference between tuna and a piano? This is actually my favorite one out of the bunch. I think this is hilarious.
Yeah, well, I figured I knew your answer before I even when I read the question. So you got everything, nothing, the weird thing in between, and you can tune a piano, but you can't piano a tuna? There you go. Wow, I didn't even think that.
Yeah. Now there's a few.
That's not how it goes, right?
There's a few of you that are selecting the weird thing in between. What's between a tuna and a piano? That's a whole other joke right there. We can make. You know what? We should do a session where we just make up punchlines to this joke.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't think we can call that CPE though.
Probably not, and I don't know that we'd get anybody to attend.
One more person. Who are we waiting on? Hit that button.
Somebody who went to the bathroom.
Probably. Well, you got 5 seconds. You have 0 seconds. Clint Elliott says, you can't tuna fish. Yeah, REO Speedwagon. All right. Moving on up. So, Melissa, hopefully you understand already why I say Yes, technically you can file a CDP on a levy, on an actual levy, but you don't want to. The CAP program is much more appropriate. And your second question about the time frame on a CAP is the reason why, okay? The collection appeals program is a fast track appeals process, okay? When you file a CAP request, it does two things. One, it immediately draws in a supervisor or manager. If you're at ACS, it's going to draw in a supervisor. Okay? If you're dealing with a revenue officer, it's going to draw in the group manager. Guess what? Group managers don't like this. They're busy people. Because of the budget and staffing situation, most group managers are actually back to working a fairly significant collections caseload themselves. Okay? I mean, it may not be 40 or 50 cases. It may only be 20, but on top of all the other crap they have to do, okay, they got their own cases to work with. They got HR issues to deal with. They've got higher-ups to answer to. They got their office to run. Okay? The last thing they want to do is deal with a problem that their revenue officers couldn't fix. Okay? So I have never had one of these conferences where the group manager was in anywhere close to a good mood. It's never happened. If somebody out there has, I'd love to hear the story. But just in my personal experience, they do not like these, okay? Because it interrupts their schedule, because there is this 2 business day mandatory requirement for them to be in touch with you, okay? Now, I think it's awesome, okay? It's a way to force their hand, okay? How many of you have had a situation where you've been trying to get a revenue officer on the phone for weeks? You can never reach them, and they never return your calls. How many of you have had that happen? Dan, have you?
Yeah, I've got one right now.
Okay. Randall says yes. Okay. Guess what? A CAP appeal, great way to go. Okay. Because then you get the group manager involved. You get their boss involved. Okay. And then the RO has to answer to their boss saying, why aren't you doing your job? Okay. So I love CAPs. And CAPs are typically reserved in the majority of cases. Okay, you can file them on other things. But usually this is the tool that we turn to get a levy released. So Melissa, as soon as a levy hits, file a CAP. Within 2 business days, the RO and the group manager will be on the phone with you. Okay? And remember, for a bank account levy, the bank takes the money out of the customer's account and holds it for 21 days, calendar days, not business days, okay, before they send it to the IRS, okay? Also remember, if you can't resolve the situation with the group manager, they're required to send it up the chain to appeals, and this is where the appeals backlog starts, because appeals has 3 business days to talk to you, okay? This is how you get a case resolved in 5 business days, all right? It's the CAP program, typically filed on a levy, all right? And the beautiful thing is that CAP decisions at appeals are binding on collections. If appeals says, this is all horse pucky, the taxpayer is obviously insolvent and is obviously a CNC candidate and issues said judgment, it is binding on collections. And that is a beautiful thing. If appeal says they qualify for an installment agreement of X dollars a month that you've been arguing for months anyway, and they should have already been on the installment agreement, should have already been making payments, and therefore the levy is BS, and appeals agrees with you, that's binding on collections. Appeals will issue the 433D. Okay? It's awesome. Okay? Danielle says, I had one that we reached out to in a super urgent levy situation, called her 27 times in 3 business days with no response. Fired a cap and the GM called by end of business same day. Never did hear from the RO. We think she may have gone into hiding with Voldemort. That's a Harry Potter reference, if I recall.
Yeah, that is.
Yeah, Danielle, that is the exact situation. Okay, if you want to move things along quickly, and you have something you can file a cap on, do it. All right. Now, a cap can be filed by either the taxpayer, by you, or a third party whose property is subject to a collection action. Okay? If you have a business client and they have received an accounts receivable, or one of their customers has received an accounts receivable levy, the customer can file a cap about that accounts receivable levy. Okay? And those can be interesting. We don't have time to go into a tangent on those, but I have done a few of those. Those can be interesting resolution options. File a cap when levy or seizure action has been taken or will be taken. Remember, the IRS is no longer really in the seizure business. They only do a few hundred seizures a year now compared to when they used to do thousands a year, but they do still happen, right? You can file a cap on a notice of federal tax lien, okay? If a tax lien gets filed and someone's going to lose a security clearance, they're going to lose a contract from a customer because of the lien, they're going to lose a FINRA securities license and lose their job, okay? Those are all perfectly acceptable to file a cap on instead of a CDP, because the CDP is going to take 6 months, cap's going to take 5 days, okay? You can file a cap in alter ego nominee situations, okay? So this can come up, especially if you do what we call a NewCo flip. And that's a whole 2-hour conversation on its own, and we'll be talking about that at the 3-day conference in Orlando in May. That's one of the presentations I'll be doing there, okay? Denials to issue lien certificates, such as a subordination withdrawal or non-attachment certificate from the Technical Services Advisory Group, okay, the PALS people. If they don't give you a subordination that you need, you can file a cap on that, okay? Terminated installment agreements, okay? You can file a cap on the termination of an IA. Disallowance of taxpayers' request to return levied property. This is particularly important for business property, okay? There are restrictions on levy of business property required for the generation of revenue, okay? And that's codified in statute, not procedure, all right? So inappropriate levies on business property, file a cap, okay? Lots of latitude within the cap program. That's the purpose of this. That's really the point of this slide, okay? This is the 9423. It is a form that you should get to know and love, okay? The boxes here, okay? Now, if you are appealing, say, the denial of a subordination, okay, then you're going to check the federal tax lien box because it's lien related, okay? Amit, we got just a few minutes left. Termination of installment agreement. If you don't agree with the IRS terminating an IA, let's say an IA was terminated because the IRS didn't receive a payment because it was on direct debit and had been for several months, and then 1 month the IRS forgets to debit the checking account. Okay? This happens. It happened a lot last year in particular. It was so bad, TIGTA did a study on it, okay? And then no payment, IA gets terminated by a computer, okay? File a cap and get the IA reinstated. These are really, really simple. And in fact, a group manager has the authority to do the reinstatement. So hopefully you can just get it done on that first conference call and avoid appeals entirely, okay? Modification of an installment agreement. Can you tack on new tax debts to an existing installment agreement? Yes, you can, okay? Can you adjust an installment agreement payment because of a change in financial circumstances? Yes, you can, okay? Okay, so that's what the modification box is for. And then there's a box to provide a written explanation. It is not uncommon. Again, I'm long-winded, as all of you know. I like to write, and so it's not uncommon for me to, there's not a very big box for your explanation. I'll attach a couple-page letter to the 9423, okay? All right. A special thing I want to talk about, and we're almost done, but that's 941 levy releases, okay? If you are dealing with a business client and a payroll account or an operating account gets levied, you have two very, very valid reasons for demanding a levy release. The first one is third-party harm. And the primary argument you're going to make there is that the levy against a payroll account is going to cause paychecks to bounce, okay? And then third parties, meaning the employees and their families, are going to be unable to buy food, pay rent, turn on the heat, okay? That's third-party harm. In those situations, the IRS will listen, okay? The other is if, and this applies usually to operating accounts, is that the levy will consume all operating cash that is required to pay vendors and other operating expenses, and it would significantly disrupt business operations to the point where it jeopardizes or potentially even eliminates the ability of the business to continue operating and be viable and therefore pay back the liability, okay? This whole thing of loss of livelihood, interruption of revenues because of IRS enforcement actions is actually a story that I've told dozens and dozens and dozens of times to appeals, okay? It's not a tearjerker story like, you know, the employee side is, you know, the employee paychecks bouncing, or, you know, it's not a tearjerker because of, you know, drug and alcohol issues or whatnot in relation to penalty abatements, but it's very legit and it's actually something you use far more often, okay? And you say, look, appeals, listen, you got to release this levy, otherwise the business is going to go under and the IRS is never going to get a dime, okay? You have to then be able to demonstrate on paper with financials that the business is actually viable and that there's room for the IRS to get paid. And so you get the levy release and an installment agreement all in one fell swoop from appeals, okay, the same hearing. Now, if you go in and all the financials indicate that the business is not viable and the IRS is never actually going to be able to collect on this, do you think that you're going to get the levy release? Much harder argument, okay? I've lost a number of those, okay? I've won a few, but I've lost more of those than I've won, okay, for a non-viable business, okay? Sometimes you go into the appeals hearing and say, look, we need the money returned because this is our wind down plan, and we're actually closing the business, okay? So, OIC appeals, how many more do I got? Okay, we're almost done. Doubt as to collectability offers, okay, can be appealed. Doubt as to liability offers. After rejection by examination, so after they reject your your doubtless liability or your what's it called, your audit reconsideration, you can appeal those denials. Okay. Offers submitted directly to appeals as an alternative to the proposed collection action in a CDP case. We talked about that earlier as part of AJAC. Appeals will retain those. Offers being evaluated by collection when a notice of federal tax lien is filed and the taxpayer requests a CDP hearing or equivalent hearing. In those cases, what was I trying to talk about on this slide? What was the point of that line? I actually don't remember. Dan, do you remember what I was talking about with that line? Appealing offers being evaluated by collection. You know what? I'm sorry. I don't remember what I was going to talk about that. I think the big point was about the retention of the case within appeals. Okay, I think that was the big thing I was getting at. Last polling question. Did you hear about the guy who jumped off a bridge in Paris? He was insane. Get it? The River Seine?
Yes.
I don't know. For some folks, that might be too challenging of a geography question. I don't know. Yeah, it was me. All right.
It was me after the jokes, yeah.
All right, 100% voted. A couple of real quick things. Melissa, I want to make sure that you understand the cap and how that all works. That's kind of the pivotal thing about this whole presentation. So, Melissa, let me know that all made sense and got your questions answered. Trust funds, real quick. Only collections can recommend assessment of the trust fund recovery penalty. Okay, so it's got to be ACS, a campus supervisor, or an RO. When you get the letter 1153, which is the proposed assessment of the trust fund recovery penalty, you have 60 days to appeal, not 30. And then you file your appeal. There are two different procedures. Okay, there's the small case approach and then the formal appeal approach. Both of them are outlined in the 1153 instructions. And you send that off to appeals. The break point is it $25,000, I think? Yeah, $25,000 is the break point for small case versus a formal appeal. And that actually doesn't have much to do with appeals. It actually has to do with how appeals handles the case for potential referral to tax court. That's why the difference in the procedures. It has more to do with the tax court side. But here's the interesting thing. Appeals, you present all your arguments to appeals. Appeals can reverse a revenue officer's determination under the 4180 interview as to whether the individual is willful and responsible. Remember, in order to be assessed the trust fund recovery penalty, an individual has to have been both willful and responsible for the federal tax deposits. Okay, you have to meet both criteria. Okay, and that's another thing that we'll be talking about in Orlando. All of our technical presentations in Orlando in May are about 941 stuff. Okay, so if you can convince a settlement officer that the person was either unwillful or unresponsible for the federal tax deposits, then bam, appeals will reverse the trust fund assessment. Okay. Alternatively, the taxpayer can pay the trust fund and then file an 843. I have never filed an 843 in my entire career. I think it's a useless form. But there are some people that argue that paying it and then trying to get the rebate side, is another way to go. But personally, I've never done it. Maybe in more complex, larger cases, I could see it. We know where you do the thing where you pay 1/4 and whatnot, but I've never dealt with that. So, some extra reading. These are some of the best sections of the IRM. Okay, and I don't mean best as in put you to sleep the fastest. Pretty much everything that we went through today in terms of the procedural stuff is the kind of my plain English interpretation of stuff out of the IRM. Okay, The IRM is my go-to resource. Not enough practitioners reference the IRM, and I think that that's a travesty. You should get to know the IRM and snuggle up with it periodically. Okay. Let's see. Keep in mind the CDP is one of the most powerful tools in your tax resolution arsenal. Use it. Okay. There's a lot of people that just want to do everything under a cap. There's a lot of benefits to using the CDP. And then always look for appeals rights first before even thinking about the taxpayer advocate. Okay? A lot of times practitioners or taxpayers want to jump to the taxpayer advocate. Okay? There is a scope to what the taxpayer advocate can and will accept for assistance. And guess what? Just a regular old levy ain't one of them. Okay? So therefore you got to look for appeals rights. Taxpayer gets a lien filed against them. A lot of people want to jump straight to taxpayer advocate. Taxpayer advocate won't look at it because you didn't already file existing appeals procedures, and they will reject your Form 911 filing. Okay? So appeals first. Appeals first for most collections actions that you want to have taken a look at. Melissa asks, is audit reconsideration a form of appeals? Yeah, that's on the examination side. Yep. Okay, any other questions? I'll stick around to the top of the hour. I realize some people probably have client appointments or whatnot this afternoon. But I'll stick around till the top of the hour if anybody has questions. Dan, is there anything you want to throw in?
No, I think you did a good covering of that. You know, each time I hear you talk about it, I learn about something new, and I've heard you speak on this at least a good 2 or 3 times. So, you know, I mean, I think the biggest thing is just knowing the timing, when you can, what it covers, and obviously the biggest thing is really between the CDP and the cap.
Yeah. Know when to apply each of them.
Yes, right. And when they apply, one thing that I have to say that again, I always talk about how I go to the IRS tax forums every year, and they usually have at least 1, if not 2 sessions where they have a couple of guys. They do some hypothetical case studies with doing both CDP and cap, and they've talked about AJAC before, and so they do talk about that, and they have some representatives that you can talk about some things in general with them, and they're very helpful with it.
Yeah. So any question? Oh, another thing about the IRS forums is they always have, and I could be wrong, but I think they actually are appeals people, but I could be wrong on that. But they have senior people there, and you can bring them your most difficult case. I've never done this, but I've heard that it's actually a pretty good program to get FaceTime with an IRS person that has the authority to actually fix stuff that's just straight up broken.
It's called case resolution. You're allowed to do that, and you basically go in, you make an appointment to come back at some point in time during the course of the 3 days. Yeah.
Okay, got it. So yeah, that's
you're only allowed to bring 1.
Correct. Yeah, only 1.
1 unresolved case.
And it's first come, first served, I assume, isn't it?
Yes.
Or do they triage it?
No, I mean, you come in, and as long as they've got slots, you're allowed to deal with it. I did it. I tried it 1 year in regards to one case. It was a penalty in regards to a late filed W-2s that I was trying to get cleared up, that ultimately I really didn't get anywhere with it. And it was like $1,500 or something, and the guy finally just paid it instead of, because I was trying to tell him it wasn't his fault and he didn't need to do it. It was his prior preparer, but he paid it anyway.
Okay. So yeah, you use these tools. Sharonda asks, when will you reschedule the IRM training webinar? So we did the IRM, that was what, 2 weeks ago, I think? 3 weeks ago? So I did reschedule it, but I did it only to a small group of premium members. And it was a test. But people generally seemed to like it. I am going to change the format slightly and do more preparation ahead of time to avoid wasting time on things that really, I don't know, that are harder to apply towards client situations, because my whole shtick with the continuing education stuff is that I only want to present stuff to you guys that is pragmatic, that you can actually go and do something with it for your clients. So I don't cover a lot of theory. I don't cover nuance type stuff a whole lot, right? I try to cover bread and butter stuff that's helpful. So I'm going to sift and sort through the IRM a little bit better for future ones of those. But yeah, we will be doing those in the future. Look for those pretty much all spring, summer. We'll be doing them all year. Probably do a couple of them a month, actually. So, yeah. Well, any other questions?
There's the one comment by Randall. That's always a positive.
Yeah, thanks.
I guess when he says no coffee needed, I'm assuming that means he was able to stay awake and learn and enjoy.
Well, that's the way we try to make things work here in the fun time zone we call Taxlandia. Dan has no comment.
No comment. Although I live in Taxlandia, yes. But at this point, I think the biggest thing is tune in next week, everybody. And if you haven't registered for May, where we're taking this to another level in regards to talking, as Jason mentioned, the 941 payroll-related aspect of tax resolution. And I think you'll also enjoy the things that we've talked about last week in regards to setting up for the marketing practice management side of things as well.
Yeah, I will put a link to the Orlando conference. Shazam. Yeah, if you want to enter the 941 world, come on out to Jamlando. Do you guys still call it Jamlando, or is that just a thing when I lived there?
Probably when you lived here. I don't recall.
Okay. It was in relation to Space Jam. Do you remember that movie?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was in relation to that. My girlfriend, when I lived in Orlando, she was a cheerleader at Boone High School, and I remember during a basketball game, they did this whole Space Jam routine during halftime. I was like, that was awesome.
Yeah, and for those of you out there that are kind of questioning about that, Jason was 18, right?
Oh,
you were 18,
yeah.
19 when you lived in Orlando. So.
I was in the Navy, right out of high school myself. She was a senior. She was also 18.
Just wanted to put that out there.
Just to be clear. Good point. Good call. Clay Rivers says, nice to see the changes in the poll questions. Yeah, I figured it was time to change them up, but just so you know, you're stuck with these ones for the next 2 or 3 months now.
Yeah, unless I can get my hands on them ahead of time, guys. That's usually the only times they ever get changed.
Yeah.
I did that once.
Yeah. No, I actually found a website that is full of dad jokes, so I am going to try to change them up a little bit more often.
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, that's what they are, dad jokes.
And before somebody says, why aren't the polling questions applicable to the actual topic of conversation? It's because under the CPE regulations, they don't have to be. That's why. Have a good one, Amit. Talk to you tomorrow. Yeah, same place, indeed. Same place, different link. All right, everybody, let's go ahead and close out. Thanks for being here. See you next Friday if you're just in the CPE series, or I'll talk to you tomorrow if you're coming around for the marketing stuff. Tomorrow is going to be the good one for the marketing and sales side. We'll be talking about fee quotations and closing sales. That's the topic for tomorrow. So
Yep. Sorry,
yeah.
I won't be able to attend. Tomorrow
So
is our 1
not going to be on
o'clock
at
soccer
all?
game.
Is that
I will not be on at all, no.
okay? That's what I thought was happening today, but okay, it's tomorrow.
No.
Got it.
Tomorrow. Yes.
Well, why don't you send me an email or something
well,
with this information, man?
It. Yeah.
I'm kidding.
It's good information, and adding my 2 cents, I'll miss that opportunity, but I'm sure you will do it justice, and hopefully, since that'll be the last session for that, we'll again continue to see people in Orlando to continue that.
Yeah, and again, tomorrow is the last session of that. I am not adding a 6th one. I decided not to do that, so I'm skipping a ton of marketing stuff so that we can jump straight to the fee quotations and closing sales, because I think that's actually the stuff people are most interested in. So that is the plan for tomorrow. All right. Thanks for being here, Dan. I appreciate it. Thanks, everybody, for your questions. Appreciate it, and I'll talk to you next time.
Thanks, Jason. See you later.